My guest for this session is Glandion Carney. Glandion has a Christian Reform background. He's chaplain for the Christian Legal Society. He's the author of numerous books. Among them is this book, A Hard-Fought Hope. It's really a journey with Job. And one of the things I love about this book is that Glandion himself is the model for the line drawings in it. Glandion lives in Birmingham, Alabama with his wife, Miriam. And one important thing about Glandion that you need to know is he loves Starbucks coffee.
Yes, unfortunately, I'm dependent on the coffee.
But another important thing about Glandion is that he has 4 children and 8 grandchildren. Can you name the 8?
You know, I was rehearsing this for the last several days because I'll often get them mixed up, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
There is Brittany, there is Stephen, there is Tatiana, there's Malik, there is, Richard. I have a hard time keeping up with them. My quiver is quite full.
Well, you got quite a ways into it.
Yeah, I did.
Well, in this session, we're thinking together about the contemplative stream, the prayer-filled life. Now remember, the contemplative stream is referring to a loving attention to God. Now, Glandion, can you share with me how this particular stream became important in your own life?
Well, Richard, it was an unusual experience for me because I was in Ethiopia and Eritrea back in the 80s with World Vision. And I had just brought Dick Gregory and Martin Luther King III to Ethiopia.
Really?
And Dick Gregory one day was in the mountains, naked under a blanket, and I asked what was he doing, and he said, I wanted to know what it felt like to be hungry and cold. We walked down the mountain, and I happened to come into a valley with 4,000 people that were sick, extended bowel, diarrhea, mothers with no longer milk in their breasts, fathers who had died along the way, children had become the responsibility of their sisters and brothers, and there was one doctor in a triage line giving 50 chips that day for people who were ill. And that day, I entered into the triage line in total silence. There was only a few coughs, a few tears, but total silence of 3,000 people. And I joined the doctor in praying for these people, and it was silent prayer. It wasn't vocal or verbal, it was silent. And I touched all those people that day. And it wasn't seeking the Mother Teresa Award, it was just simply being present with people.
Yeah.
And I recognized that God moves in silence. And most of the world today, when they're suffering, suffer silently. And to enter into that silence was an opportunity to seek a contemplative God who understood the silence as prayer. And that was my experience.
And so entering into the silence helped, in a sense, to identify with the suffering.
Because you see, before that I was very boisterous, I was very loud, I was Mr. Black Evangelical, and thought I had to have a platform, and I think it corresponded with my hair. I had a lot of hair then.
That began to leave.
It began to leave, and so the reality of contemplative life began to affect the fact that the diminishing hair was probably the reason for that.
For people who don't know, there was a time when you were 3 inches taller by means of the hair.
It was a long day. But the idea of being silent was a sense of identifying with them that moved me into this realm of silence with God. And it was through human suffering that invited me to experience a deeper contemplative life.
Yeah. Is there anybody that has been a particular model for you about the contemplative stream? I mean, maybe a contemporary person?
Well, there are 2 people that stand out mostly, and they're not contemporary now. They're no longer with us. Howard Thurman, who wrote Jesus the Disinherited and many other books. Howard was the mentor for Dr. King in the Civil Rights Movement, and it was out of that experience that Howard taught at various seminaries and universities and so on. Wrote poetry, was a pastor. And he understood something of the quiet life, the still reflected life around God, the centering life. And I think he stands out as a contemporary, as a saint who understood the balance between social action and the balance between contemplative life. And Thomas Merton stands out as a wonderful person for me to reflect and read about and think about. And and try to reflect his thoughts on. Thomas writes and says that those who seek the contemplative life must understand it's a life of ordinary. If it's not a life to be lived in a monastery or in a monk's environment, it's a life that housewives, business people, computer analysts can embrace and live with. So he takes that and plays that out in his writings. And of course, great conscious builder of social action and responsibility.
Right.
And deeper
Another
life.
person I think of is W.E.B. Dubois.
Oh, yeah, right.
And his book, The Soul of Black Folk. I think it gave, at least for me, a sense of contemplative. I mean, I remember his phrase when he saw the sun brooding, like a brooding sorrow on the hill. And I mean, just almost that poetic way that he was able to write led you into being still.
Henry Nouwen says the best counselors are the saints, because they stand out as reflective people, allowing us to enter into their lives, their prayer life and reflective life, and offering us an opportunity to experience a side of God in meditation and prayer that is so personal and so real that it just encourages you and teaches you deeply.
Glandion, can you help us sense why this particular stream, the contemplative stream, is so important to you? Why is it central to, I mean, I've watched you and I mean, you're very busy, you have a lot to do, and yet there's that kind of quiet centeredness in your life?
Well, Richard, I love your reflection on the streams and loving attention to God, gazing upon God, reflecting upon God. I find that there are many things to gaze on today, many things to reflect on, many avenues to go down that will take your mind and heart away from God. We live in a very competitive society, in a very busy world. So the intentionality of gazing upon God for character formation, for discipleship formation, for a greater degree of sensitivity to those around us. I cannot imagine a life of not gazing and reflecting and meditating upon God. I can't imagine a life that would not allow me to experience the prayer-filled life that allows me to go into a deep place. And this is not for mystics, this is not for psychics, this is not for people who love God, who live every day, who struggle with being a grandparent or a husband or a wife, in order to reorientate, and orientate my life again at the end of the day.
This idea of orientation and reorientation, do you have any kind of experience or maybe a pattern, a practice?
For me, it's orientation in the morning. You know, a cup of coffee is orientation. I believe in the great Celtic prayer, let this coffee warm me as it warms my spirit, and let this brew of coffee brew in my spirit. You know, Celtics took life of prayer and they involved everything around it. It was whatever they saw was a life of engaging with prayer. So orientation is about getting a perspective. It's about gaining an awareness. It's about being intentional around your course of the day. For example, one day I said, Lord, let my decisions today honor you. Let my decisions today reflect godly character. And that day was probably the most engaging day of prayer, because every decision I made was a matter of prayer, a matter of conversation, a matter of dialogue and listening. So orientation is about getting and gaining perspective. Reorientation, because you lose it. By lunchtime, you've engaged some facet of life that has allowed you to feel some need to turn you away. And reorientation is about going back and having a noonday rhythm, a noonday perspective of prayer and reflection and meditation, a Psalms, a thought of Scripture. And then reorientation for the evening is really when we begin our day again. It's getting and gaining a perspective on the course of the evening, seeking forgiveness, recollection, confession, meditation about your course of the day. Where was God most evident today? Where did you sense the Spirit of Christ? How could you have been more responsible in your avenue and in your life of care and commitment? Where have you failed God today, and where have you seen God today? And it's an opportunity for examination and reflection and change, because that's what it's all about. Transformation is about change.
I remember a phrase from Nicholas Grew. It's actually a prayer. "O divine Master, teach me this mute language which says so much." I mean, you learn, don't you?
Yes, you do.
In contemplative prayer.
Well, you learn to be still and know that I am God. You learn to know that the soul longs for God.
Yeah.
More than anything else, it longs for God.
Yeah.
For the sake of God, not for the sake of a better life, or not for the sake of a better mystical or deeper experience or a greater degree of peace or family intervention, whatever it might be, but the soul longs for God
Yeah.
and ultimately seeks God.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a novice at this. I'm not an expert. I still have my pitfalls and my struggles and my addictions to coffee. So I want to make that clear.
But can you help us, Glandion? This is an integration question. So many times, this is true, of course, with all of these streams, but I think the contemplative stream, the temptation maybe is sometimes greater to isolate it.
Oh, sure.
How does the contemplative stream fit with all these others that we've been discussing in these sessions?
Well, the contemplative stream is an opportunity to sit by a river imaginatively and think about how your life is being transformed with character formation around holiness.
Yeah.
To ponder the question of examination, where am I lacking? What are the issues that I need to really concentrate on? What are the things I need to ask the Lord to let me be more prayerful attentively about in order to be formed in the image of Christ? In the area of the evangelical tradition, where am I developing a need for ongoing scripture formation in my life? How can I memorize Colossians 3 and put off these things that are evident in my life where I need to draw closer to God? So embracing the scriptures. The social justice tradition, where your heart really is open to the pain of society and the world, where you don't live an isolated, shallow life, but you know that God is connected to the streams of people and their hurts, and you engage in prayer, and that prayer can be around you. The kingdom is all around us. I was sitting in Starbucks one day and I heard two homeless men talking about their medication. And I said, God, touch them. Give them grace today. Give them your guidance today.
I know of a meditation you often lead people through about the suffering of the world, which ties into the social justice stream. I mean, we won't do it, but can you describe it a little bit for people?
Yeah, Richard, one day I was watching CNN and I was watching the bombed out buildings of Lebanon and the war in Israel, between Lebanon and Israel. And like every person who sees this, they become very frustrated. Where is God? What is this all about? And the Spirit of God gave me a big impression, like the Pillsbury Doughboy commercial, where it just kind of packs your stomach and said, wow. And I said, God, it must be tough being God. By the end of the day, you've seen more pain and suffering than we've ever could see.
Yeah.
God, can I sit with you in silence and just bear with you the burden of being God? And he gave me that invitation, and I could only stand 5 minutes of the silence, because what stood out in the silence were the cries of the souls of people. Now imagine God, by the end of the day, hearing what happens in Iraq, hearing what happens in the inner cities of America, hearing what happens in places where slavery and child pornography and pain is evident, and the mother who suffers and cries. God hears all those things, and we have an opportunity to sit silently and say, God, I'll just bear with you the burden if you allow me to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Glandion, is there a passage of Scripture that kind of encapsulates for you the contemplative stream?
Well, there are many stories in the Bible. I love stories in the Scriptures. Stories seem to add to a life of vision and reflection. But the one that stands out is in the New Testament, John 15, where Jesus invites his disciples to become his friends. I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends, because a friend knows what his master, knows what his father is doing. It's not like a master-servant relationship. And what captures me is the opportunity to sit as a friend with Jesus and the Trinity and enjoy their presence and their company, and be invited to pray, and to be invited to reflect, and to be invited to meditate upon his graces for our life and formation.
You know, Glandion, I think there are many strengths in the contemplative stream. That sense of fanning the flames of our first love.
Sure.
That sense of white-hot passion toward God.
Yes.
Moving us beyond a kind of, cerebral religion. As the old writers would say, we descend with the mind into the heart, and there stand into the presence of God. It emphasizes solitariness of our life with God, but our engagement with the world as well, like you've discussed.
And it also emphasizes examination,
Yeah.
which sometimes can become self-absorbing, but it really shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You have to always watch that,
Yeah.
that you're not navel-gazing
Yeah.
and picking at the length and picking
Well,
at
that
issues.
shows one of the pitfalls, doesn't it?
Right,
One of the kind of
exactly.
dangers.
Yes.
Are there others that you...
Well, Richard, I think the biggest danger, and you write about it so adequately in your book, Streams, but the biggest danger is separating it from everyday life. That we assume that this has to be done in the context of a monastery or in a cloistered environment, and we don't tie it to everyday life.
Yeah.
Spiritual life is tied to everyday existence. It's tied to the relationship of life. For example, yesterday, I'll give you an example briefly.
Good. Yeah.
Marion was gone. She's doing some stuff out of the home, and I was preparing to come, and I put some bacon on. And I went up to the computer and forgot that the bacon was on, and I walked down to a smoke-filled kitchen. It was terrible. And I had a panic attack, and I started praying. And really started praying because I know what Marion was going to come home to when I left.
That's right.
But it's tied to everyday. It's tied to the struggles of everyday life. It's tied to existence. It's tied to whatever the course of the day is.
Yeah.
And the pitfall is to take it and treat it as though it's different. Another pitfall is what I call consumer gluttony, where we are such consumer-oriented that we begin to look at spiritual experiences in a gluttony way. Oh, contemplation is another thing that I can buy, or I can read about, or I can graduate to in this society where we're so driven to consumerism. So our spiritual life becomes consumers-based, while we just walk down the nearest Barnes & Noble and pick the quickest book up on spirituality.
Well, you know, the Desert Fathers and Mothers would talk about spiritual gluttony as a danger that we've got to learn to have a balance in our lives. What counsel would you give in maintaining that kind of balance?
I think the counsel that I would give people today are three things. First, I advocate they need to find a spiritual director, someone you can talk to, a spiritual friend. I use that language better. A friend who can help you reflect, think, ponder, and bring things into perspective that allows you to use that time of meditation and prayer to bring about some character formational change in your life. And a friendship can help you do that. I think another factor could be opening yourself up to reading and drawing from the saints. You know, we tend to think that it was a Reformation and that was it. But there's a whole history of Christian spirituality that we can draw from that helps us to experience the great life of prayer and meditation and formation. And I think the other thing is find something to do with your hands that allows you to serve in a soup kitchen, or allows you to bake bread, or give away something, because the spiritual life is about giving. It's about experiencing God in order to give out His grace to others.
Yeah. Glandion, is there any word of encouragement that you might be able to give people who are watching this series? I mean, all of us struggle with how we can make this real in our lives, and you know, sometimes we get discouraged about ourselves. Can you encourage us in any way?
Sure, Richard. Let me take a moment and do this. I'd like to bring you to a passage of Scripture in John 15 where Jesus is talking about friendships. He says that I'm your friend and you're a friend of mine. Now imagine, if you will, you're sitting in the corner and you're watching the Trinity converse as friends. They're talking about creation, redemption, God's work on earth, the work of Christ, the work of the Spirit. And they invite you to come and sit at the table with them with your coffee in hand. And they say, friend, what do you need? Imagine, if you will, being tongue-tied because you're in the presence of the Trinity and don't know what to say. But you think about it for a moment and you say to yourself, I want to be more like Jesus. I wasn't like Jesus yesterday when I snapped at my wife, when I wasn't attentive to a friend, a colleague. I want to be more like Jesus. And the Spirit said, that's possible. I think that can happen. What else do you need? And you examine your life and you say, you know, there's an issue of patience in my life. There's a little character flaw. I want the fruit of the Spirit of patience and kindness and love. Can that happen? And the Spirit says, yes, it can. You're a friend. Just walk in this way. And then the Father turns to you and he says, what do you need? And you're really tongue-tied. You say, Father, I want you to be honored and loved throughout the world. Can I somehow be a witness to that reality? Now, in a matter of moments, you're back in your room, but you've had a conversation with the Trinity. You've covered life of prayer. You've covered character formation. You've covered the call to evangelize and care about the brokenness of our world. In a matter of minutes, you've meditated and have drawn and gazed upon the Trinity. I'd invite you to spend time gazing, reflecting, praying, thinking about the Trinity, being a friend. Friends share secrets, friends share thoughts, friends shares love relationships that are important to them in their own life. Bring poetry to him. Bring prayers to them. Share your life with them. And I tell you, the white-hot love for God will burn deeply within your soul, like Pascal saying, burn, 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 O love of God, burn within my soul. And we'll see you later. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Bless you,
Glandion.
Richard.
If a local congregation has no concept of the practice of contemplation, what are they missing?
Oh, that's a tremendous point. And a lot of the grief that you find around local congregations rests right here. What they're missing is a sense of the adequacy of God. And so what they wind up trying to do is be adequate to themselves. And then the next thing they're on to one another, why aren't you adequate? Right? And the peace that comes into a local congregation when they learn adequacy of God through centering on Him. And who knows, even in that case, they might even have a few moments in a worship service where they would all be quiet.
Yes.
What an idea.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Now, in this teaching series, I've talked about how we can see the contemplative stream in the life of Jesus. Is there anything else in Scripture that would encourage us toward contemplative practice?
It's just loaded, as I'm sure you know. Some of the most deep teachings are Psalm 119, where over and over you're drawn, oh, how wonderful your law is.
Yeah, right.
You know, the right understanding of the law, centering on that. The meditation in the law day and night of Psalm 1. See, that's other great passages. 1 Thessalonians 5:19, Paul tells the Thessalonians to pray without ceasing.
Yeah.
And many people just sort of fall over in a faint at that. But of course you learn how to do that.
You learn to do it, don't
and oh, what a relief that is when that happens. Paul in jail writing to the Philippians, be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God that passes all understanding will keep your hearts and minds. Yeah. And the great verse that I think John spoke of in his session, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee because he trusteth in thee. See, these are great. Perfect peace is like creme de la creme, the cream of the cream. The peace, when you have peace, you look at that and say, now that's peace. See, that's the top level of peace that just, and that always comes with joy and love. They always come together.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Dallas.